The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Jake Thompson stared out his bedroom window, his reflection ghostly against the glass. At 17, he was tall for his age, with unruly dark hair and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words. His room, adorned with posters of rock bands and shelves lined with trophies, told the story of a typical American teenager. But Jake was far from typical, at least in his own mind. The muffled sounds of his parents chatting and laughing downstairs only deepened the furrow in his brow. He could picture them now. His mom, Sarah, with her warm smile and gentle eyes, and his dad, Robert, with his booming laugh and strong hands. They were good people, loving parents by all accounts. Yet a nagging voice in Jake's head whispered otherwise. "They're not really your parents," it said. "You're just a charity case." Jake shook his head, trying to silence the intrusive thoughts. He'd known he was adopted since he was 10, when his parents sat him down and explained with love and care that they had chosen him. They told him it was the happiest day of their lives when they brought him home at 2 years old. But as the years passed, that knowledge became a wedge, slowly driving a gap between Jake and the only family he'd ever known. A soft knock on the door jolted Jake from his brooding. "Jake, honey, dinner's ready," his mom called out. "I'm not hungry," Jake replied, his voice flat. The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped in, concern etched on her face. "Are you feeling okay? You've been so quiet lately." Jake shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "I'm fine." Sarah moved closer, reaching out to touch his arm. Jake flinched involuntarily, and he saw the hurt flash across her face before she could hide it. "Jake, please talk to me. Whatever it is, we can work it out together," she pleaded. The sincerity in her voice only fueled Jake's confusion. Part of him wanted to throw his arms around her, to be comforted, like when he was little. But the other part, the part that had been growing louder lately, held him back. "There's nothing to talk about," he muttered. Sarah sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Okay, but remember, your father and I are always here for you. We love you so much, Jake." As she turned to leave, Jake felt the words bubbling up inside him, sharp and bitter. "Do you really? Or am I just some good deed you did 15 years ago?" Sarah froze, her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly, her face pale. "Oh, what did you say?" Jake's heart raced, but now that he'd started, he couldn't stop. "I said, do you really love me, or am I just here because you couldn't have kids of your own?" "Jake!" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with shock and pain. "How can you even think that? Of course we love you. You're our son." "But I'm not, am I?" Jake shot back, his voice rising. "Not really. My real parents are out there somewhere, and they didn't want me, so why would you?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "Jake, please. Your father and I chose you. We wanted you more than anything in this world. You are our son in every way that matters." Jake turned away, unable to bear the sight of her tears. "Just leave me alone," he mumbled. He heard Sarah's shaky breath, followed by the soft click of the door closing. As soon as she was gone, Jake slumped onto his bed, his own tears threatening to spill over. He hadn't meant to lash out, hadn't meant to hurt her, but the doubts that had been festering for months, maybe years, had finally boiled over. In the silence of his room, Jake made a decision. He couldn't stay here, couldn't keep pretending. He needed answers, needed to find out where he really came from. With trembling hands, he pulled out his backpack and began to stuff it with clothes. As the last rays of sunlight faded from his window, Jake Thompson prepared to leave the only home he'd ever known, unaware that his journey to find himself would lead him right back to where he began. The cool evening air nipped at Jake's face as he slipped out of his bedroom window. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of adrenaline and fear coursing through his veins. The familiar streets of his suburban neighborhood suddenly seemed alien and foreboding in the gathering darkness. Jake pulled his hoodie tighter around him and started walking, his backpack a comforting weight on his shoulders. He had no real plan, no destination in mind. All he knew was that he couldn't stay in that house another minute, suffocating under the weight of his own doubts and the love he wasn't sure he deserved. As he walked, memories flooded his mind. His dad teaching him to ride a bike, his mom bandaging his scraped knees, family game nights filled with laughter. Each recollection was a dagger to his heart, making him question his decision. But then the darker thoughts would creep in, reminding him that he was an outsider, a stranger in his own family. After an hour of aimless wandering, Jake found himself in front of a familiar house. It belonged to his best friend, Alex Chen. Alex was the only person who knew about Jake's inner turmoil, the only one he'd confided in about his struggles with his adoption. Jake hesitated for a moment before approaching the front door. It was late, past 10 p.m., but he could see lights on inside. Taking a deep breath, he rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door swung open, revealing Alex's surprised face. Jake, what are you doing here so late? Jake shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing how impulsive his actions had been. I, I left home, he mumbled. Alex's eyes widened. What? Why? Come in, man. Jake followed Alex into the house, the warmth and familiar scents washing over him. He'd spent countless hours here, playing video games, studying, or just hanging out. It had always felt like a second home. Alex, who's at the door? Mrs. Chen's voice called from the living room. It's Jake, Mom, Alex replied, leading Jake towards the kitchen. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. Jake, is everything all right? Jake couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry to bother you so late, Mrs. Chen. I needed somewhere to go. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. You're always welcome here, Jake, but does your mother know where you are? The guilt Jake had been trying to ignore surged to the surface. He shook his head silently. Mrs. Chen sighed. I think we should give her a call. She must be worried sick. No! Jake exclaimed, panic rising in his voice. Please, I can't go back there right now. Alex and his mother exchanged a worried glance. Okay, Mrs. Chen said gently. Why don't you boys go up to Alex's room? I'll make some hot chocolate and we can talk about this. As they climbed the stairs to Alex's room, Jake felt a mixture of relief and shame. He was grateful for the Chen family's kindness, but he also felt like an intruder, bringing his problems into their peaceful home. Once in Alex's room, Jake sank onto the bed, his backpack dropping to the floor with a thud. Dude, what happened? Alex asked, sitting beside him. Did you have another fight with your parents? Jake nodded, staring at his hands. I couldn't take it anymore, Alex. The constant feeling that I don't belong, that I'm not really part of the family. I had to get out. Alex was quiet for a moment. Jake, you know that's not true. Your parents love you. Do they? Jake snapped, his frustration bubbling over. Or do they just feel obligated because they adopted me? Maybe they regret it now. Maybe they wish they had a real son instead of me. Jake, Alex began, but was interrupted by raised voices from downstairs. Both boys froze, listening. They could hear Mr. Chen's deep voice sounding uncharacteristically angry, and Mrs. Chen's quieter tones trying to calm him down. What's going on? Jake whispered. Alex's face had gone pale. I think my dad just found out about my college applications. What do you mean? Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. I applied to art school without telling him. He's always wanted me to go into business or law, but that's not what I want. I guess Mom finally told him. As the argument downstairs grew louder, Jake felt a strange sense of deja vu. Here he was, running from conflict in his own home, only to find himself in the middle of another family's storm. He watched as Alex's confident demeanor crumbled, revealing a vulnerability Jake had never seen before. In that moment, Jake realized that perhaps the grass wasn't always greener on the other side. Every family had its struggles, its misunderstandings, and as he sat there, a witness to the Chen family's private pain, Jake began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The argument downstairs continued to escalate, the muffled voices growing sharper and more distinct. Jake and Alex sat in tense silence, both feeling uncomfortable for different reasons. I can't believe you'd throw away your future like this, Mr. Chen's voice boomed, causing both boys to flinch. It's not throwing away my future, it's choosing my own path, Alex shouted back, his usual calm demeanor cracking. Jake shifted uneasily on the bed. Maybe I should go, he whispered to Alex. Alex shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. No, please stay. I don't want to be alone right now. The vulnerability in Alex's voice struck Jake deeply. He'd always seen his friend as the epitome of a perfect son. Smart, confident, with loving parents who seemed to support him unconditionally. But now he was witnessing firsthand that even in seemingly perfect families, there were cracks beneath the surface. Mrs. Chen's voice floated up the stairs, strained but trying to mediate. Please, both of you calm down. We can discuss this rationally. Rationally? Mr. Chen scoffed. There's nothing rational about wasting 4 years on some pipe dream. It's not a pipe dream, Dad, Alex yelled, his frustration palpable even from upstairs. It's my passion, my talent. Why can't you see that? The argument continued, each word feeling like a physical blow to Jake. He couldn't help but draw parallels to his own situation. Here was Alex fighting for his dreams against his father's expectations, while Jake had run away from parents who had only ever shown him love and support. Has it always been like this? Jake asked softly. Alex sighed, wiping his eyes. No, not really. Dad's always been pretty intense about my future, but I've never stood up to him like this before. I've always just gone along with what he wanted. Jake nodded, understanding all too well the weight of parental expectations. Why didn't you tell me about the art school applications? I don't know, Alex admitted. I guess I was afraid. Afraid of disappointing my parents. Afraid of failing. It was easier to pretend everything was fine. As they sat there, listening to the ongoing argument, Jake felt a shift inside himself. He thought about his own parents, how patient they'd been with his recent moodiness, how they'd always encouraged him to pursue his interests. Even when he'd lashed out at his mother earlier, she had responded with love and concern. Alex, Jake said slowly, I think I made a huge mistake. Alex turned to him, confusion evident on his face. What do you mean? Running away, Jake explained, the realization dawning on him. I've been so caught up in my own head, convincing myself that my parents couldn't possibly love me because I'm adopted. But listening to this, it's made me realize that every family has its struggles. The fact that my parents chose me, that they've stood by me even when I've been difficult, that's real love. Alex managed a small smile despite his own turmoil. I've been trying to tell you that for months, man. Jake chuckled weakly. Yeah, well, sometimes you need to see things from a different perspective to really understand. Just then there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Chen poked her head in, her face lined with worry. Boys, I'm sorry about all the commotion. Jake, I've made up the guest room for you. And Alex, your father and I would like to speak with you, if you're ready. Alex took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Okay, Mom, I'm coming. As Alex stood to leave, Jake caught his arm. Hey, thanks for being here for me tonight, and good luck with your parents. Stand your ground. But remember they love you, even if they don't always show it the right way. Alex nodded, a look of determination settling on his face. Thanks, Jake. And hey, maybe it's time you cut your parents some slack too, huh? As the door closed behind Alex, Jake was left alone with his thoughts. The sounds of the Chen family's continued discussion drifted up from below, but it seemed calmer now, more measured. Jake lay back on Alex's bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought about his parents, back home, probably sick with worry by now. He thought about all the times they'd supported him, cheered him on, comforted him. How could he have doubted their love? How could he have convinced himself that biology was more important than years of care and devotion? With a jolt, Jake sat up, reaching for his phone. He had turned it off when he left the house, afraid of the calls and messages he knew would be waiting. Now, with trembling fingers, he powered it on. Immediately, the screen lit up with notifications. Missed calls from Mom and Dad, voicemails, text messages pleading with him to come home, to talk to them, to let them know he was safe. Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he read through the messages. The fear and love in every word was palpable. How could he have been so blind? In that moment, Jake knew what he had to do. It was time to go home, to face his parents, and to finally open up about the fears and insecurities he'd been harboring. It wouldn't be easy, but as he'd learned tonight, no family was without its challenges. What mattered was facing those challenges together. With a newfound resolve, Jake began to pack his backpack. He would leave first thing in the morning, but not before thanking the Chens for their hospitality and for inadvertently helping him see what had been right in front of him all along. As he settled into the guest room for the night, Jake felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He was going home, back to the family that had chosen him, loved him, and never given up on him. And this time, he was choosing them right back. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the Chen's driveway as Jake shouldered his backpack. He had woken up early, his mind made up about what he needed to do. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. Are you sure you don't want us to drive you home, Jake? She asked, her voice soft with worry. Jake shook his head, offering a small smile. No, thank you, Mrs. Chen. I need to do this on my own, and thank you for everything. I'm sorry for barging in last night. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, surprising Jake with a warm hug. You're always welcome here, Jake, but I'm glad you're going home. Your parents must be worried sick. The guilt that had been gnawing at Jake's insides intensified. I know, I just hope they can forgive me. They will, Mrs. Chen assured him. That's what parents do. As Jake started down the driveway, he heard rapid footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Alex running towards him, still in his pajamas. Hey, man, Alex panted, catching up. I wanted to catch you before you left. How are you feeling? Jake took a deep breath, considering the question. Nervous, scared, but also kind of hopeful? I don't know, it's weird. Alex nodded, understanding in his eyes. I get it. Listen, about last night. Thanks for being there. Talking to my parents wasn't easy, but we're going to keep discussing it. They're at least willing to consider the art school thing now. That's great, Alex, Jake said, genuinely happy for his friend. I'm glad you stood up for yourself. Yeah, well, Alex shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. I had a good example of bravery right in front of me. Jake scoffed. Running away wasn't brave. Maybe not, Alex conceded, but going back home to face everything? That takes guts, man. The two friends embraced briefly before Jake set off, the weight of his decision propelling him forward. The familiar streets of his neighborhood seemed different now, charged with a new significance. Each step brought him closer to home, to the confrontation he both dreaded and longed for. As he walked, Jake's mind wandered back to the night before. He thought about the argument he had witnessed between Alex and his parents, how it had shaken his perception of what a perfect family looked like. He realized now that there was no such thing as a perfect family. Every household had its struggles, its misunderstandings. What mattered was how they faced those challenges together. Before he knew it, Jake found himself standing at the end of his driveway. His house looked exactly as he had left it, but something felt different. Maybe it was just his perspective that had changed. Taking a deep breath, Jake walked up to the front door. His hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment before he changed his mind and reached for his keys instead. This was still his home, after all. As he pushed the door open, Jake called out softly, Mom? Dad? I'm home. For a moment, there was silence. Then he heard rapid footsteps, and suddenly, his mother was there, her eyes red and puffy from crying, her hair disheveled as if she hadn't slept. Jake! She cried, throwing her arms around him. Oh, thank God you're okay. Jake hugged her back tightly, feeling his own eyes well up with tears. I'm so sorry, Mom, he choked out. I'm so sorry. His father appeared in the hallway, relief washing over his tired face. He joined the embrace, his strong arms encircling both Jake and his mother. For a long moment, they just stood there, holding each other. Jake could feel the love emanating from his parents, the worry and relief and joy all mixed together. How could he ever have doubted this? Finally, they pulled apart. His mother cupped his face in her hands, her eyes searching his. Jake, honey, where were you? We were so worried. We called the police, your friends. I know, I'm sorry, Jake said, the guilt overwhelming him. I was at Alex's. I needed to get away. But I realize now how stupid and selfish that was. His father's hand squeezed his shoulder. We're just glad you're home safe, son. But we need to talk about this. About everything. Jake nodded, wiping his eyes. Yeah, we do. There's so much I need to tell you, to explain. They moved to the living room, settling onto the familiar couch. Jake sat between his parents, feeling both comforted and anxious. I've been struggling, Jake began, his voice shaky. Ever since I found out I was adopted, I've had these thoughts, these doubts. I convinced myself that you couldn't really love me because I wasn't your biological son, that I was just some charity case. His mother gasped, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Oh, Jake, no! How could you think that? I know it's not true, Jake hurried to add. At least I know that now, but for a while I couldn't shake those thoughts. Every time you disciplined me or we had a disagreement, a part of me wondered if it was because I wasn't really yours. His father leaned forward, his face serious. Jake, listen to me. You are our son in every way that matters. We chose you, yes, but not out of pity or obligation. We chose you because we loved you from the moment we saw you. You completed our family. Your father's right, his mother added, taking Jake's hand. The day we brought you home was the happiest day of our lives. We've never, not for 1 second, thought of you as anything less than our own flesh and blood. Jake nodded, feeling a weight lifting from his chest as he finally voiced the fears that had been plaguing him. I know that now, or at least I'm starting to really believe it. Being at Alex's last night, seeing that even families who are biologically related have their issues, it made me realize how lucky I am, how much love you've given me. His parents exchanged a glance, a mixture of sadness and understanding passing between them. Jake, his father said gently, we had no idea you were feeling this way. Why didn't you talk to us about it? Jake shrugged, feeling a bit embarrassed. I guess I was afraid of hurting you, of seeming ungrateful, and maybe a part of me was afraid you'd confirm my worst fears. Oh, sweetheart, his mother sighed, pulling him into another hug. You can always talk to us about anything. We're a family, and that means facing our problems together, not running away from them. As Jake sat there, enveloped in his parents' love, he felt a sense of peace washing over him. There was still a lot to work through, a lot of healing to be done. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future. I love you guys, he murmured, his voice muffled against his mother's shoulder. And I'm so sorry for putting you through this. His father ruffled his hair affectionately. We love you too, son, more than you could ever know, and we'll get through this together. As the morning sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in warm light, Jake knew he was exactly where he belonged. He was home, in every sense of the word, surrounded by the unconditional love of the parents who had chosen him, and he was finally ready to choose them back, wholeheartedly and without reservation. In the weeks that followed Jake's return home, the Thompson household underwent a transformation. It wasn't a physical change. The walls were the same color, the furniture unmoved, but rather a shift in the emotional atmosphere. The air felt lighter, charged with a new sense of openness and understanding. Jake and his parents had embarked on a journey of healing, one that involved many long, sometimes difficult conversations. They'd decided as a family to see a counselor specializing in adoption issues, a step that Jake had initially resisted, but now found incredibly helpful. On a crisp Saturday morning, about a month after that fateful night, Jake sat at the kitchen table, absently stirring his cereal as he watched his parents move about the kitchen. His mom was making pancakes, the sweet aroma filling the air, while his dad brewed coffee, humming softly to himself. You okay there, sport? His dad asked, noticing Jake's pensive expression. You've been stirring that cereal for so long, it's probably turned to mush. Jake smiled, shaking himself out of his reverie. Yeah, I'm good, just thinking. His mom turned from the stove, spatula in hand. Penny for your thoughts? Jake took a deep breath. These moments of vulnerability were still new to him, but he was learning to embrace them. I was just thinking about how different things are now, how different I feel. His parents exchanged a glance, one of those wordless communications that Jake used to resent, but now understood as a sign of their deep connection. Different how? His mom probed gently, sliding a stack of pancakes onto a plate. Jake considered the question. I feel lighter, I guess. Like I'm not carrying around this huge secret anymore. And I feel closer to you guys. It's like, I don't know, like I'm seeing you clearly for the first time. His dad sat down at the table, placing a mug of coffee in front of Jake. We feel the same way, son. These past few weeks haven't been easy, but I think we've all grown from this experience. Jake nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. He'd only recently started drinking it, another small sign of his growing maturity. I keep thinking about what Dr. Simmons said in our last session, about how families are built on more than just DNA. What do you think about that? His mom asked, joining them at the table. Jake was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I think I think I finally understand it. I mean, I always knew it in my head, but now I feel it in my heart. You guys chose me, and you keep choosing me every day. That's that's pretty amazing. His mom reached out, squeezing his hand. Oh, Jake, we'll always choose you. You're our son, no matter what. I know that now, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. And I choose you too. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out. His dad cleared his throat, his eyes suspiciously moist. You know, Jake, your mom and I have been talking. We think it might be good for you to learn more about your birth parents, if that's something you're interested in. Jake felt a jolt of surprise. This was a topic they'd skirted around in the past, always treading carefully. Really, you'd be okay with that? His mom nodded. We want you to have all the pieces of your identity, Jake. Knowing about your birth parents doesn't change who we are to you. If anything, we hope it'll help you understand just how much you're loved by us and by the people who made the difficult decision to give you a different life. Jake felt a rush of gratitude and love for his parents. Their willingness to open this door, to support him in exploring a part of his past that might be painful for them, spoke volumes about their love for him. Thank you, he said softly. I think I think I'd like that. Not right away, maybe, but someday. His dad smiled. Whenever you're ready, we'll be right there with you. As they ate their breakfast, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Jake's upcoming soccer game, his dad's work project, his mom's book club. But underneath the ordinary chatter, Jake felt a new undercurrent of understanding and connection. Later that day, Jake met up with Alex at their favorite coffee shop. As they settled into a corner booth, Jake couldn't help but notice the change in his friend. Alex seemed more relaxed, more confident, a far cry from the conflicted young man he'd seen that night a month ago. So, how are things with your parents? Jake asked, stirring sugar into his latte. Alex grinned. Actually, pretty good. We've been talking a lot more. They're still not thrilled about the art school idea, but they're coming around. Dad's even agreed to visit a few campuses with me. That's great, man, Jake said, genuinely happy for his friend. I'm glad you guys are working it out. Alex nodded, his expression turning serious. Yeah, me too. And you know, I've been thinking a lot about that night, about what you said before you left. Jake raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah? What about it? You told me to stand my ground, but remember that my parents love me, Alex said. That that really stuck with me. It helped me approach the whole situation differently. So, thanks for that. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his chest. I'm glad I could help. Honestly, that whole experience helped me too, seeing that even your family, which I always thought was perfect, had its own struggles. It put things in perspective for me. Alex chuckled. Perfect? Far from it. But I guess that's the point, isn't it? No family is perfect. We're all just doing our best. Exactly, Jake agreed. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there for each other, even when things get tough. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their drinks and watching the world go by outside the coffee shop window. So, how are things with your parents? Alex asked eventually. You guys seem closer lately. Jake smiled, feeling a surge of affection for his family. We are. It's been a process, you know. Lots of talking, some therapy, but I feel like I understand them better now, and they understand me. It's like we're building something new, something stronger. Alex nodded thoughtfully. That's really cool, Jake. I'm happy for you. And you know, I've always thought your parents were pretty awesome. They are, Jake agreed. I just couldn't see it for a while. But now I know how lucky I am. As they continued to chat, Jake felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He thought about the journey he'd been on, the doubts and fears he'd harbored for so long. It amazed him how much had changed in just a month. That evening, as Jake sat in his room working on homework, he heard a soft knock at his door. Come in, he called out. His mom poked her head in, smiling. Hey, sweetie. Your dad and I were thinking of watching a movie. Want to join us? A month ago, Jake might have declined, preferring to stay isolated in his room. But now he found himself eagerly nodding. Yeah, that sounds great. Let me just finish this paragraph. As he followed his mom downstairs, Jake felt a rush of love for his parents. He watched as his dad set up the movie, his mom arranging snacks on the coffee table. These simple domestic scenes that he'd taken for granted for so long now filled him with a profound sense of belonging. Settling onto the couch between his parents, Jake felt his mom's arm wrap around his shoulders, his dad's hand resting on his knee. As the movie started, Jake wasn't really paying attention to the screen. Instead, he was acutely aware of the warmth of his parents beside him, the sound of their breathing, the feeling of safety and love that enveloped him. In that moment, Jake realized that this feeling of unconditional love and acceptance, was what family truly meant. It wasn't about blood or DNA or biology. It was about choice. His parents had chosen him, And now, finally, he was choosing them back, fully and without reservation. As the weeks turned into months, Jake found himself growing in ways he never expected. He was more open with his feelings, more confident in his place in the family. He'd even started volunteering at a local adoption support group, sharing his experiences with other adoptees who were struggling with similar issues. One particularly memorable day came when Jake decided to share his story at a school assembly about diversity and inclusion. Standing on the stage, looking out at a sea of faces, Jake felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Family, he began, his voice steady, is not defined by blood. It's defined by love, by choice, by the people who stand by you through thick and thin. I'm adopted, and for a long time, I thought that meant I didn't fully belong. I was wrong. As he spoke, Jake saw his parents in the audience, their faces beaming with pride. He saw Alex giving him a thumbs up from the third row, and he saw the rapt attention on the faces of his classmates, some nodding in understanding, others listening with newfound awareness. My parents chose me, Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. They chose to love me, to raise me, to stand by me even when I pushed them away. And now I choose them back. Every day, I choose to be part of this family that has given me everything. As he finished his speech to enthusiastic applause, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. He'd come a long way from that confused, angry boy who'd run away in the night. He'd learned that family was not about perfection, but about perseverance. It was about showing up day after day, choosing to love and be loved. In the months that followed, Jake's relationship with his parents continued to deepen. They had their disagreements, of course. What family doesn't? But now, instead of letting these conflicts drive a wedge between them, they faced them head on, communicating openly and honestly. Jake also found himself becoming a source of support for Alex as his friend navigated his own family challenges. There were tough days when Alex's parents struggled to understand his artistic ambitions, but Jake was there to remind his friend of the love underlying those difficult conversations. As his senior year of high school progressed, Jake started to think about his own future. College applications loomed on the horizon, bringing with them a new set of anxieties. But this time, instead of bottling up his fears, Jake shared them with his parents. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table discussing potential schools, Jake felt a familiar twinge of insecurity. Do you guys think I can really do this? Go to college, I mean? His parents exchanged a glance before his dad spoke up. Jake, we have absolutely no doubt that you can do this. You're smart, hardworking, and more capable than you give yourself credit for. His mom reached across the table, squeezing his hand. We believe in you, sweetie. Always have, always will. Whatever path you choose, we'll be right here cheering you on. Jake felt a lump form in his throat. Even if I want to go to school far away? Even then, his mom assured him, distance doesn't change how much we love you or how proud we are of you. His dad nodded in agreement. You're our son, Jake. Nothing will ever change that. Not distance, not time, not anything. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of his parents' love and support, Jake felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He thought back to that night he'd run away, how lost and alone he'd felt. The contrast between then and now was stark, a testament to the healing power of love and understanding. As the evening wore on, their conversation drifted to lighter topics. They laughed over old family stories, planned for an upcoming weekend trip, and debated the merits of various ice cream flavors for dessert. It was ordinary, mundane even, but to Jake it was everything. Later that night, as Jake lay in bed reflecting on the day, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He thought about the long journey he'd been on, the doubts he'd overcome, the love he'd finally allowed himself to fully accept. He realized that family, true family, was not about perfection. It was about acceptance, about choosing each other every day, through good times and bad. It was about creating a home not just in a physical place, but in each other's hearts. Jake's adoption would always be a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it was just one thread in the rich tapestry of his life, woven together with the love of his parents, the support of friends like Alex, and his own growing self-acceptance. As he drifted off to sleep, Jake felt a smile tugging at his lips. He was home, he was loved, and he was exactly where he was meant to be. And that, he realized, was the greatest gift of all.